The air in the Bureau of Land Management, BLM auction facility was thick with the dust of the high desert and the metallic tang of tired livestock. Overhead, the fluorescent lights spat and sizzled, their relentless hum sounding like angry caged wasps. Ethan Vance, owner and heart of the remote Sagebrush Compass Ranch in Nevada, squinted at the animal being shoved into the sale ring, Lot 47. Ethan, a man who measured life in ounces of rain and bales of hay, was here for practicality, a mature, steady gelding to replace the good working horse he'd lost. Lot 47 was the antithesis of practicality. It was a bay colt, a scrap of equine life no more than 4 months old. Its legs were disproportionately long, its body alarmingly small, and the prominent skeletal ridge of its ribs showed clearly through a patchy, dull coat. It carried itself with an unnatural, exhausted stillness that Ethan found instantly disturbing. The auctioneer's bored voice crackled through the speakers. Bay colt, approximately 16 weeks, captured from the Shadow Peak Range Roundup, severely underweight, unweaned, starting bid $75. Silence. $75 was less than the cost of a bag of feed, but nobody moved. This colt was trouble wrapped in fear. Too young, too weak, too much work, with years of specialized care before it could ever be useful. The buyers, hardened commercial men, only saw the liability. "Let it go, Vance," Ethan's internal rancher commanded. "Don't buy a heartbreak." But as the gavel began its fateful descent, going once, Ethan's chest tightened. He saw not a horse, but a 10-year-old boy standing alone outside an indifferent courtroom after tragedy, waiting for a fate he couldn't control. 150. Ethan's voice cut the silence, shocking even himself. The auctioneer blinked, then recovered. "Sold! To buyer number 34 for $150? A minute later, outside the ring, Ethan found his foreman, Silas Boone, leaning against a rusty water trough, his face a mask of disappointment. Silas had worked the Sagebrush Compass for decades, a man of few words and absolute practicality. "You've acquired a liability," Silas observed, his tone deadpan. "A 4-month-old youngling that will require a nursing schedule and a vet account that will eclipse his market value 100 times over." "I know the math, Silas," Ethan replied, not taking his eyes off the colt being led toward them. He'd already named the little horse in his mind, Cinder, for the hidden reddish embers in his coat. Up close, the colt was worse. He was dangerously emaciated. But as Ethan began a clinical inspection, his rancher's eye noticed discrepancies that immediately sent a cold alarm bell ringing. The hooves. They were worn down in a pattern too uniform and flat for the rocky, varied terrain of a wild range. They suggested prolonged time on a hard, unnatural surface. Asphalt, concrete. Furthermore, faint, slick rope scars circled the colt's hocks, carefully concealed by a handler's positioning during the sale. Then, running a gentle hand along the little horse's neck, Ethan felt it. A small, hard, perfectly round lump beneath the skin, just forward of the mane. It was the size and texture of a quarter, embedded under old, faint scar tissue. It was clearly not an abscess. "Carl," Ethan called softly to his stable hand, the kind, seedy man in the plaid shirt and overalls who was prepping the trailer. "Come look at this, Carl. Have you ever seen a brand this small on a BLM horse?" Carl, the old seasoned hand approached, his thick, calloused finger briefly touching the spot. His eyes, usually filled with gentle kindness, narrowed in confusion. "No, boss, that ain't a brand. Too deep, too neat. Feels like..." Carl trailed off, shaking his head. Ethan didn't need him to finish. It felt like an implant, and wild Mustangs from federal roundups do not come with electronic implants. "Load him quietly," Ethan instructed, his voice low and serious. "Silas, you saw nothing. Carl, you stick to the feed schedule. This stays between the three of us until we get him home." During the long, tense drive back to the Sagebrush Compass Ranch, Ethan considered the possibilities. A lost domestic horse? The rope marks argued against innocence. Stolen? Likely. But the hidden implant suggested a horrifying professional efficiency. It wasn't the work of opportunistic thieves. It was the mark of an organization using the vast, empty high desert as a theater for something far darker. Back at the ranch, Dr. Ilara Khan, the ranch veterinarian, arrived quickly. As she conducted her thorough examination, her professional demeanor cracked. This youngling is severely malnourished, weaned far too soon, probably forcefully. She confirmed Ethan's suspicion about the hawk scars. Rope burns, recent, from sustained restraint. Then she focused on the neck. Running a standard veterinary chip scanner over the lump, the machine remained stubbornly silent. "This is not a registered chip," Dr. Khan declared, the gravity in her voice deepening. "This is something else. Ethan, if this is what I think it is, a covert tracking device, you have stumbled into something far bigger than horse theft." The cold certainty returned to Ethan. The colt was not just a victim, he was a silent messenger. 3 days, Ethan insisted, looking from the small, shivering colt to the concerned faces of Dr. Khan, Silas, and Carl standing nearby. 3 days to stabilize him. He has to survive the next step. Then, Dr. Khan, we take out that implant, and if it's criminal, I don't call the sheriff. I call the federal agency that handles drug rings. Cinder's survival now hinged on that small, quarter-sized secret hidden beneath his skin. The arrival of the federal team was a whirlwind of controlled chaos. Leading the team was Special Agent Lena Petrova, a sharp-eyed woman in her late 30s with a specialization in rural organized crime and an unnerving ability to assimilate complex details instantly. She listened to Ethan's account, from the suspicious hoof wear and the rope burns to the terrifying panic responses, while her technical squad meticulously examined the extracted GPS tracker. "This is top-tier covert hardware," Agent Petrova confirmed, holding the small capsule in a sealed evidence bag. The kind of miniaturized, ruggedized tracking used for sensitive, remote logistics. We've been tracking an uptick in narcotics movement through this specific sector of the high desert. Places too rugged for satellite coverage and too vast for standard patrols. If they're using wild horse movements as a template to disguise their own activities, it resolves dozens of logistical questions for us. Agent Petrova explained the chilling sophistication of the scheme. Drug cartels were moving away from predictable border checkpoints, leveraging the expansive, uninhabited landscapes of the American West. The wild Mustangs provided the perfect, naturally occurring camouflage. Law enforcement patrolling from the air or checking for disturbance wouldn't flag ground that had recently been traversed by a migrating herd. By implanting GPS trackers in young horses and releasing them, the criminals could monitor real-time herd positions across hundreds of miles. A new, added detail was Agent Petrova's insight into the timing. The foals, or younglings, were chosen specifically because they remained close to their mothers and were less likely to be immediately separated from the main herd, guaranteeing a stable monitoring sample. They were also the most vulnerable during a BLM roundup, making them easily retrievable assets. "It's horrifyingly brilliant," Agent Petrova conceded, shaking her head. "A large herd's movement across the landscape is expected. We see hoof prints and disturbed earth. We write it off as nature. But those prints, those paths, were providing real-time safe corridors for illicit transport operations." Over the next week, the investigation exploded. Petrova's technical team, tracing the tracker's data stream, managed to access months of historic movement logs. The data, when overlaid on known intelligence, aligned perfectly with at least 50 known drug seizures and dealer arrests that had previously seemed disconnected from any clear trafficking route. The pattern became undeniable. Criminals were catching young Mustangs from the Shadow Peak Range, implanting the trackers, and then releasing them back to their herds. When the BLM conducted its necessary periodic roundups, cartel proxies, often legitimate-looking buyers or kill buyers purchasing cheap slaughter prospects, would quietly reclaim the tracked horses, remove the evidence, and dispose of the animals to eliminate the risk of the device ever falling into the wrong hands. The cartel hadn't accounted for the impulsive compassion of a rancher like Ethan Vance, who saw a reflection of his own early trauma in an unwanted colt. The real breakthrough came when the agents successfully traced the device's server communication stream, not just the data, but the control signals, to a heavily encrypted server farm operating out of a remote location in Sonora, Mexico. This discovery provided the necessary judicial reach, rapidly leading to synchronized arrests across 3 states in the U.S. and a major logistical facility bust south of the border. The operation, which had been running successfully for over 2 years and funneling hundreds of millions of dollars in narcotics through the desert, was finally dismantled. Cinder, the forgotten youngling, was the key. His tiny body had held the secret that brought down a multi-state trafficking network. But victory brought complication, as the source of the critical physical evidence, the GPS tracker, and the living proof of the method, Cinder technically became the property of the federal government. Agent Petrova delivered the news with visible reluctance. "We need to keep him in federal custody until all trials are completed. He is physical evidence, a key part of the prosecution's case. It could take 18 months, possibly longer, with appeals. He'll be held at a specialized BLM facility." Ethan felt a crushing weight in his chest. In the 3 weeks since Cinder had arrived at the Sagebrush Compass Ranch, the colt had found a fragile trust. He was eating well. His coat was starting to gleam, and he was beginning to move with less apprehension, especially around Ethan. Moving him now, putting him into a high-stress institutional environment, would likely destroy all their progress. The emotional toll alone could be fatal to an animal already severely traumatized. "There is another option," Agent Petrova offered, sensing Ethan's distress. "In cases involving animal witnesses, specifically those who have suffered abuse that forms the basis of the cruelty charges, we can sometimes allow private custody with strict oversight." She outlined the terms. Ethan would be designated Cinder's legal custodian. He would need to maintain meticulous veterinary and feeding records, permit unscheduled federal inspections, and guarantee Cinder's availability for any court proceedings or media events required by the prosecution. "Frankly, it's better for us," she admitted. "We can document his ongoing recovery, show the jury the before and after, the physical damage these criminals inflicted on an innocent animal. Nothing motivates a jury like visible, documented animal cruelty." Ethan didn't hesitate. The Sagebrush Compass is his home. He stays here. The arrangement was quickly formalized. Cinder would remain at the ranch under the constant oversight of Agent Petrova's field unit, with Ethan and Silas serving as his dedicated caretakers. As the legal wheels turned over the next several months, Cinder's physical recovery continued to impress Dr. Khan. But the psychological healing was far more remarkable. The terrified, sunken-eyed colt gradually transformed into a confident, curious, and playful young horse. He developed an especially fierce bond with Ethan, his rescuer, following him around the main paddock like an oversized, slightly nervous dog. A moment Silas never forgot. One crisp autumn afternoon, Cinder, then nearly a yearling, spooked violently at a distant, high-pitched noise. He bolted, not towards the safety of the barn, but directly towards Ethan, burying his head against the rancher's chest, trembling uncontrollably. It wasn't just fear, it was a desperate, ingrained seeking of protection from the one person he deemed safe. However, the deep-seated trauma never vanished entirely. Loud, low-frequency vehicle rumbles, the shadow of a dark baseball cap, And most definitely, the distinct sound of rotor blades still triggered a hypervigilance, freezing Cinder mid-graze and forcing him to watch the threat until it passed. The trauma had left an invisible scar on his psyche, a permanent watchfulness, much like the faint, perfectly round scar left on his neck where the tracker had been. The trials became a media sensation. Federal prosecutors made Cinder's story the emotional centerpiece of their case. They leveraged the narrative perfectly, bringing the now recovering horse to the courthouse steps for photo opportunities. The defense attorneys for the cartel lieutenant Ramiro Cruz objected strenuously, calling it gross emotional manipulation. But the judge, citing Cinder as crucial physical and behavioral evidence, allowed his presence. The defense's fate was sealed when Ramiro Cruz, testifying via video link, made a cavalier, arrogant smirk while an agent detailed the process of implanting the trackers in the younglings. The smirk was instantly captured by courtroom cameras and broadcast nationwide, creating a public relations disaster for the defense. Ethan's testimony, by contrast, was devastating. He spoke simply, powerfully, about the moment he saw the look in the colt's eyes at the auction, the discovery of the tracker, and the violent, abnormal fear responses to specific human clothing and mechanical sounds. Prosecutors played slow-motion video footage of Cinder's panic response to a simulated helicopter sound in a safe paddock, showing the jury the raw terror the animal experienced. The jury took less than 4 hours to return a verdict of guilty on all major counts, including drug trafficking conspiracy and felony animal cruelty. The legal machinery, slow and relentless, finally ground to a halt. When the final appeals were exhausted, the last defendant, Ramiro Cruz, sentenced to a lengthy federal term, Cinder was officially released from his status as federal evidence. He was 3 years old now. No longer the scraggly, traumatized colt Ethan Vance had impulsively purchased. He had grown into a handsome young bay horse, standing just over 15 hands, a testament to his resilient Mustang heritage and the relentless care he had received. His coat was a rich, polished mahogany, and his movements in the pasture were fluid and powerful, reflecting the intelligence and alertness that had saved him. Agent Lena Petrova arrived at the Sagebrush Compass Ranch personally to deliver the final release papers. It was a clear, dry Nevada afternoon, and she found Ethan and Silas watching Cinder interact playfully with a pair of young geldings in the expansive south pasture. "He's all yours, Ethan," Agent Petrova said, her voice softer than Ethan had ever heard it. She handed him a single heavy folder containing the final decree. "No more federal oversight, no more restrictions. He's just a horse now." Ethan accepted the folder, the official seal feeling cold and formal against his palm. He watched Cinder rear slightly, shaking his head in a gesture of pure, joyful energy before dropping back to a trot. "He was never just a horse," Ethan replied, the sentiment genuine and deep. "He's the reason we shut down an operation that was poisoning communities and exploiting the desert's most vulnerable inhabitants. He's a hero, Agent Petrova. He just doesn't know it." Agent Petrova smiled, a rare, genuine expression that crinkled the corners of her sharp eyes. The Bureau, frankly, doesn't often spare much thought for individual animals in a case of this magnitude, but Cinder's story? It changed minds at the top. "We're implementing a new protocol in conjunction with the BLM, expanding the veterinary scan during roundups to search for non-standard implants like his. Because of Cinder, we might prevent this from ever happening again. We owe you both, and him, a genuine debt of gratitude." After Agent Petrova departed, Ethan and Silas stood by the fence, savoring the profound silence that had descended on the ranch after months of federal presence. The two men, one the owner and the other the seasoned foreman, stood side by side in the familiar, comfortable silence earned through years of shared hard work. Silas finally broke the quiet. "You know, Ethan, when you bought that youngling, I thought it was the worst financial decision you'd ever made. Worse than that bad hay shipment in 21. Ethan chuckled, running a hand over the weathered top rail of the fence. "And now?" Silas paused, his eyes following Cinder as the bay horse cantered effortlessly towards the distant shade of a cottonwood tree. "Still a terrible investment. From a pure balance sheet perspective," he admitted, "he will never carry a saddle, never pull a plow, never earn back the specialized care we sank into him. But as a reminder that doing the right thing, choosing compassion over the bottom line, that's been worth every single penny." Ethan nodded, feeling a quiet satisfaction settle deep in his bones. The Sagebrush Compass Ranch was not a sprawling corporate entity. Every dollar mattered. Every purchase had to justify its existence. By the cold logic of ranch economics, Cinder was a liability. But value, Ethan reflected, was not measured in dollars or pounds. The horse who had been deemed worthless, used as a disposable piece of criminal technology, and discarded, was now thriving. He had survived trauma that would have broken others. He had brought down a criminal enterprise and indirectly influenced federal policy. Most importantly, Cinder had instilled a profound lesson in every member of the ranch: the need to look beyond surface value, to recognize that the most broken, vulnerable, and unwanted creatures might be carrying the most vital secrets. The years that followed were quiet, marked by the comfortable routine of ranch life. Cinder lived out his days at the Sagebrush Compass, honored but never utilized for work. He remained a free spirit, roaming the vast fenced pastures, always part of the domestic herd, but never truly domesticated. He became something of a quiet legend in rural Nevada, the BLM hero horse. Visitors would occasionally stop by, hoping to catch a glimpse, and Ethan, if Cinder was near, would quietly oblige, sharing the story of the horse's unusual bravery. Cinder himself seemed entirely unaware of his fame. He was content with his simple existence, the taste of sweet hay, the feel of the wind across the high desert, and the sound of Ethan's calm voice. The deep-seated trauma remained as a subtle, permanent watchfulness. Helicopters still made him nervous, and the sight of a dark, wide-brimmed hat sometimes triggered a momentary freeze. Ethan's added observation: he noticed that Cinder never developed the easy, rough-and-tumble playfulness of the other horses. While he ran and bucked, he always maintained a slightly greater distance, a reserve that whispered of his past, a clear line drawn between survival and total vulnerability. On warm summer evenings, Ethan would sometimes saddle his own horse and ride out to check on Cinder. The bay horse would invariably lift his head from grazing, his intelligent eyes fixed on Ethan's approach with a calm, accepting recognition. He was no longer the terrified colt, nor was he fully a domestic pet. He was something in between, wild enough to choose his own path, but trusting enough to know that the human who mattered meant no harm. One late evening, as the setting sun painted the desert in shades of burnt sienna and gold, the exact color of the colt's namesake, Ethan sat atop his old gelding, watching Cinder play with a new youngling recently brought onto the ranch. Silas rode up alongside him, the two figures silhouetted against the vast horizon. "He's happy," Silas observed simply. "More than that," Ethan replied, pulling the brim of his hat low against the dying light. "He's free, truly free, in ways he wasn't even when he was running wild, because now he gets to choose who he trusts, and he chooses to stay. The darkness they put him through, it only taught him the value of the light we offered." Silas nodded slowly. "You think he remembers the bad stuff? The abuse? The trauma?" Ethan watched Cinder rear playfully, his dark mane momentarily catching the last of the sun's fire. I think he remembers enough to know how to appreciate what he has now. Sometimes surviving the darkness is the only way you truly learn to value the light. As they turned their horses toward the ranch buildings, the distant, contented whinny of Cinder followed them, carried on the cool evening wind. It was a sound of pure, earned peace, a promise that some stories, even those born of cruelty and covert crime, can ultimately find their way to a lasting light on the open range.